Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game. And in this video, we're going to be talking about cards that have been eclipsed by Rastakhan's Rumble. And what I mean by that is identifying cards from Rastakhan's Rumble that have in some ways surpassed cards of old, whether they're seeing more play or just seem to do something objectively better than their past counterparts. Now, before I get into the list, I do just really want to quickly say this video is being sponsored by HSReplaynet, which for anybody who watches me knows I absolutely love HSReplaynet. I talk about it all the time. It's my go-to spot for Hearthstone statistics, all kinds of crazy insights you can't get anywhere else, and a great way to figure out and solve the meta as well. So this is something I mention basically every 5 minutes, I think, on stream. And we've decided to partner for a series of videos over the next few weeks. You'll see some future ones as well, where I essentially break down stats from the site into cool insights, exactly like this list. The videos are going to seem very familiar because it's what I always do, because I always use HSReplaynet. So this was just a great natural fit, not a paid sponsorship. We're just going to be doing some cross promotions. Essentially, I know if you guys check it out, you'll absolutely adore it. There are some links in the description and comments below. But if you're a fan around here, I'm sure you're already a member. But stay tuned for future sponsored videos and cool stuff moving forward. All that said, let's go ahead and jump into the 5 cards that have been eclipsed by Rastakhan's Rumble. Up first here, I think we have the most obvious eclipsed card, and probably one that's even designed to be identified as such, between Holy Light, the old basic set card, and Flash of Light, the new Rastakhan's Rumble card. Obviously, even their names reference each other, so clearly I think Blizzard knew that Flash of Light was a vastly superior version of Holy Light, a card that I can't really remember ever seeing any sort of play, whereas Flash of Light right now is actually being played in 47% of Paladin decks over the last 7 days, and you can see that snippet there from HS Replay below the card. That's specifically in Paladin decks, whereas Holy Light right now over the last 7 days is only being played in 0.6% of Paladin decks, which basically means it's not being played at all. But Flash of Light, it turns out, great little survivability tool that helps you move through your deck, particularly efficient in things like OTK decks that need to draw cards and stay alive. So it's a card that's seeing play, and I'm not surprised. It looks like a nice little value return for only 2 mana. We've seen a lot of 2 mana cycle cards in Hearthstone succeed in the past, and since this one fits the class so well, it just makes sense. And clearly, sacrificing 2 health gain to draw a card is a huge upside, so there's no surprise at all that this one's way better than Holy Light. Healing doesn't go far enough without something attached to it, and Flash of Light finds that perfect spot where it's that cheap lay on hands that works 10 times better, is more flexible, and that's exactly why it's seeing a ton of play in Paladin. Moving on here, we have a comparison that really hurts me deep down. It's Baited Arrow and Bane of Doom. And if you don't know, I've come out many times saying I don't really think Baited Arrow is a strong card because it doesn't look any better to me than Bane of Doom, and Bane of Doom isn't a good card. Well, unfortunately, the numbers are in, and it turns out Baited Arrow is far more successful than Bane of Doom, and in fact has eclipsed it. Now, I am aware, of course, that these are across classes. It's Hunter versus Warlock, and that adds some, confounding variables a little bit to comparing these, but nonetheless, I think you can see that one works for its class and the other doesn't, and they're very similar in their structure, because with Baited Arrow, it's really about dealing 2 damage, right? Because you need to achieve that overkill. So structurally, kind of mechanically, they're almost identical cards, but the reason Baited Arrow is much better is not just because it fits well into Hunter, it's also because the consistency of the 5/5 Devilsaur makes it far more predictable and reliable than Bane of Doom, which has a lot of low rolls and backfire minions that it can summon. Like sometimes it gets a Voidwalker that's a 1/3. Sometimes it gets a Howl Fiend that discards your entire hand. So you can low roll in Bane of Doom, and the high rolls often aren't worth sacrificing that consistency. Not to mention, in a pinch, Baited Arrow can also kill 3 health things, which Bane of Doom can't. So if you're willing to sacrifice that 5/5 just to achieve like killing that Lich King or whatever you have to do, Baited Arrow offers you a little bit of extra flexibility there as well. And Bane of Doom can go face, but it's not quite as good at going face as Baited Arrow because it's only 2 damage instead of 3. So for a couple different reasons, Baited Arrow is really nice. Not to mention it plays well in the Spell Hunter archetype because they just need spells. So at the end of the day, Baited Arrow is being played in almost half of all Hunter decks over the last 7 days. 47.5% of decks are making room for Baited Arrow, whereas Bane of Doom, unfortunately, only in 0.3% of decks. So I was right, Bane of Doom's not very good, but I was wrong. Beta Darrow is significantly more impactful than Bane of Doom. So this one stings, it hurts. I was definitely very incorrect, but nonetheless, it's pretty clear one of these has eclipsed the other. Up next now, let's talk about Priest with Mass Hysteria, which has clearly surpassed Holy Nova as that 5 mana area of effect clear option for the class. Now, I can identify that these don't do the exact same sort of thing. Clearly, Holy Nova is more about small minion clears and maybe gaining a little bit of life, maybe synergizing with heal stuff like Northshire Cleric to, draw you extra cards when you heal your own minions. So a bit better when you're kind of ahead or even on board, whereas Mass Hysteria is a lot better when you're behind on board, so you can force your enemy's minions to attack all into each other. Now, Mass Hysteria clearly is working in Priest right now because it's in 67% of Priest decks, whereas Holy Nova is only in 3.6% of Priest decks. We have a huge difference there. Holy Nova basically seeing no play, Mass Hysteria being featured in most prominent meta decks for Priest. And that's a little bit of symptom of the meta, I think, and where Priest is at. And, 6 months, a year from now, different expansions could shift this a little bit. But I do think Mass Hysteria just goes all in on what it's trying to do more so than Holy Nova. Holy Nova's kind of split against being a removal versus a board kind of defense or healing your own stuff up, or maybe that heal synergy. So it kind of goes in a few different directions. It doesn't do anything especially well, whereas Mass Hysteria is just all about playing from behind, clearing big boards, removing threats from your opponent, and that's why it's so valuable. It operates in that singular direction, so decks know what they're getting with it, and they can use it to stay alive and use it to clear boards and play a little bit more from behind, which Priest right now really, really likes to do. So obviously it fits the Priest's 5 mana AoE spot much, much better than Holy Nova was, because Holy Nova just doesn't do enough in Hearthstone right now. It doesn't kill 8/8s and stuff like you need when you're playing giant minions across from you all the time. So Mass Hysteria, really the AoE Priest seemed to need, and again, this is when I was a little bit wrong about. I didn't have a whole lot of faith this was going to make the cut, but it does fill in the gap, getting to Psychic Scream a little bit better. So a card that people do end up playing. I'm not sure the statistics totally support it's the perfect card for Priest, but it's the best option they have right now for AoE, especially compared to Holy Nova. Up next here, we have a pretty interesting comparison, and we are going back to Hunter for this one. It's Masked Contender versus Professor Putricide. And I remember when Professor Putricide was first revealed, people got super pumped about the card. This is when I actually got right. And I was like trying to dial back people's expectations and excitement a little bit, because it seemed really hard to commit that much into a single turn to get Professor Putricide to make sense. In other words, you had to play Putricide, and then you had to follow him up with secrets. And keeping that minion alive into a future turn can be difficult. If you play him alongside a secret, that's already a 6 mana thing, so it happens much, much later in the game. Masked Contender takes that same sort of style of, developing a secret for free, but it shifts the direction, because with Masked Contender, you play the secret first, and then you play the minion to follow it up. And I think that's a much better direction, because secrets are sometimes much easier to keep in play than is a high priority, threatening minion like Professor Putricide, which is going to get traded into or removed and then not really return any value, thus making it a Yeti. A vast majority of the time, if you try to play it on curve, Masked Contender, on the other hand, is a card that does a couple things better. First off, it's got a fine stat line for its cost, much like Professor Putricide. It could stand to be a little bit bigger, but, it's fine. And then beyond that, you're playing a secret from your deck, which means you're getting a predictable secret that you control, and you're not going to get some random total garbage like Professor Putricide might provide. Like, maybe you don't need misdirection. Like, I don't care about misdirection. I need this specific set of secrets that I have. So that's nice. It also thins out your deck so that you can draw into other more impactful cards much more reliably and sooner. So it really takes that sort of style of Putricide, but shifts everything in a more positive direction and in a play style which makes much more sense. Now, that said, even Masked Contender is not being played a ton. I should note the statistics here are specifically for Hunter decks. Masked Contender is only in 10% of Hunter decks. It's an even less percentage, of course, if you look across the entire meta. I think it's something like 3% right now. But Putricide's not being played at all. 0.6% is virtually non-existent. So clearly, even within Hunter, Masked Contender has seen more success in those secret builds than Putricide. And if Hunter wasn't Spell Hunter focused in many cases where you can't run minions, I think Mass Contender would be even more important in that more Secret Hunter versus Spell Hunter style. So it's kind of restricted in a couple different ways because you can't run it in Spell Hunter decks. It doesn't necessarily make sense in mid-range Hunter decks. So the percentage would be higher, of course, if Hunter only had one dominant archetype. But because it has 3 or 4 different ways to be played right now, Mass Contender can't quite carve out as much of a percentage as it otherwise might when it's actually pretty decent in Secret Hunter decks. But nonetheless, I thought that was interesting how you take this same mechanic in a lot of ways. It's not exactly the same, obviously, but a similar style of mechanic. And if you just shift things around a little bit, you get a card that's clearly much more successful than even a legendary. And this is a neutral card. Now, I didn't look at the numbers here for other secret classes like Mage, Paladin, or Rogue for Mass Contender. He's not being played much in those other instances, but I thought Hunter was enough of an indication that clearly this mechanic can be shifted and turn into a pretty solid card, which I think is neat. And of course, that also means Mass Contender has a lot more potential in the future across other classes and even in Hunter than Putricide. So a neat example to look at here for a card being eclipsed in a direction you might not expect. And then finally, I have one last comparison here, and it's again going back to Hunter, and some people might be a little bit confused or perhaps even argumentative about this one, but I wanted to explore another neat direction here. And this is between Springpaw and Firefly. And if you look at these two cards, you'll see mechanically they do very similar things. Each is a 1-mana minion that adds another 1-mana minion to your hand. And obviously Firefly is a card that has rarely been eclipsed because it's a card that gets played a ton in Hearthstone. It's been one of the most prominent 1-drops in the history of the entire game, I think. Lots of decks finds ways to play it. It's just a lot of stats and good value, good flexibility. For a 1-drop, you don't get much better than Firefly. But despite that, Hunter has never really made room for Firefly that I can remember. And you can see right now, in Hunter decks, Firefly is only being played in 3.7% of Hunter decks, which I thought is intriguing. Like, why is this 1-drop that's so good for everybody else not good for Hunter? And I think with Springpaw's release, you see a couple reasons. Because Springpaw offers 2 unique advantages over Firefly. Although it sacrifices a little bit of health along the way, both of them are beasts, and both minions have Rush, which Hunter can utilize in some very sneaky ways with things like Scavenging Hyena, for instance, or Crackling Razor Maw. It's really important sometimes to get beasts on the field on turn 1 for those really strong turn 2 or later follow-ups. Beyond that, the beasts having Rush is fantastic because you can give it Poisonous with Crackling Razor Maw and trade it into a huge thing. You can just trade it off and buff your Scavenging Hyena. You can play a Houndmaster with it and give it 3/3 and take a value trade. And that's really, really important for Hunter. So that beast style of play is fundamental to mid-range Hunter lists that want to curve out in that beast synergy fashion. And Firefly never provided that opportunity. Springpaw, a similarly designed card, just tweaks a couple things. By no means overpowered, but suddenly now it's in 25.5% of Hunter decks instead of the measly 3.7%. And it just showcases exactly what Hunter is all about and how if you design a card specifically for a class, which clearly Springpaw was done, it's a Hunter card, not a neutral card, boom, everything lines up and you've got a really successful piece of the puzzle. And again, with Springpaw, this percentage would be higher, of course, if there weren't multiple Hunter archetypes because it doesn't fit in Spell Hunter or Death Rattle Hunter. So clearly just a card that's being played in most mid-range Hunter lists. And if mid-range Hunter was the only option, it would be like 80%, right? Instead of like 25. So still a really strong result here, whereas Firefly never quite made the cut. And I know that you might be saying, well, no, I mean, Regis Firefly is just never a Hunter card. You shouldn't compare these two. And sure, fair enough. But I think it's interesting nonetheless because it showcases exactly what Hunter needs and how one card that's good for most classes isn't necessarily good for everybody. But if you fill in those gaps, you've suddenly got a puzzle being solved in a class that becomes perhaps a little bit too powerful with too many options, but clearly Springpaw, a great fit for Hunter and an awesome card, whereas Firefly never quite made the cut. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for my 5 cards that Rastakhan's Rumble have eclipsed. Pretty interesting to talk through some of these, some neat little shifts and how much of an impact they can make. Other cases where it's just objectively better, like Flash of Light, like it's so obvious and on the nose that Blizzard designed a card they wanted to be a much better version of a basic card. But before I go, I do want to run you through HS Replay real quick. As I mentioned, this video is sponsored by HS Replay. I absolutely, without hesitation, think it is the best resource for any Hearthstone enthusiast out there. You can learn so much, and I just wanted to walk you through real quickly how I obtain the statistics for this video. Now, I always mix a little bit of objective data with subjective interpretation when I make videos like this. Like, I saw the cards and kind of identified the cards I wanted to talk about and then made sure the data backed them up. I didn't just go through and look at the data. But nonetheless, I want to show you some of the filters and options that I use to identify, like sorting these by class and so on and so forth. So real quickly, just let's take a look at what HS Replay can do in this specific scenario. Okay, guys, so I shrank myself a little bit so I wouldn't be blocking too much of the screen. And this is the homepage for hsreplaynet. And I just want to show you where I found the stats for this video. So one of my favorite views to go to is cards. And this breaks down card stats as opposed to like decks or, looking at the meta overall, which there are great options up here as well. You can go play with all of these. But I like looking at cards specifically. So for this video, for instance, let's take a look at Paladin for Flash of Light versus Holy Light. So I wanted to go to Paladin, so you can sort by class, and this will show you only cards being played in Paladin and the stats specific to that filter. So if you looked originally, right, like Animal Companion is, we can sort here. The most popular card in the game of Hearthstone right now over the latest patch is 27.1%. Flanking Strike, most popular card in the game, which is crazy, by the way, because it's a class card. But we want to look at just Paladin. So, Flanking Strike's gone. Consecration, most popular Paladin card. It's in 77% of Paladin decks, specifically throughout the latest patch. Now, I went to last 7 days for this filter, and then I also, of course, went to 2 mana to find the 2 mana spells in this case. And you can just type into, right, like Flash of Light, and Flash of Light will be filtered there. Or you can just look at all 2 manas, but for this instance, right, we want Flash of Light. So we search Flash of Light, we can see Flash of Light is in 47% of Paladin decks right now. And then if we want to compare, we can go, if we can type it correctly, we can go to Holy Light, and Holy Light is in 0.6% of Paladin decks. And those are the 2 cards I compared. So clearly one is way, way better. And you can also look at the played win rate for Holy Light. 31.6% is absolutely miserable, whereas Flash of Light, 54.2% is much, much better. So it's clear that the played and deck win rates for this card support its inclusion in decks. But if you wanted to look at just like all 2 mana Paladin spells, like Equality or 2 mana Paladin cards, Equality, much more popular than Keleseth, for instance, in Paladin, and that makes sense. No surprise there. Just pick 2 random ones, but you can get a feel for what people are playing. And then if you click into any individual one, we should actually do that for, we should do that for Flash of Light. If we click into Flash of Light individually, we can actually see what deck it's being played in. So you go to Flash of Light, the most popular deck for Flash of Light is this OTK Uther Paladin deck. You can see Flash of Light in there. As I mentioned in the video, OTKs are great for Flash of Light. You can also sort by win rate, so you can say, oh, okay, that list was more popular, but this list is actually a little bit better, and then you can see what cards are in this list. If you click into that deck, you can see the mulligan win rate for Flash of Light, for instance. Where is Flash of Light here in our list? Middle of the road, 60%, so pretty good. It's kept by people 27% of the time, so most people are not keeping it in the mulligan. They're prioritizing these cards instead. But for, played win rate, say Flash of Light is, where is it? I can never find it. It's middle of the road. Drawn win rate, probably middle of the road, which all makes sense, right? Because it's a card that's not like fundamental to your game plan. It's just a cycle card, essentially. But as you can see, lots of cool information here, and you can really break down all these cards in different ways. You can also see their popularity over time. Flash of Light obviously will show, if we look here, it's filtered to the first time it ever saw play, right, as opposed to showing the full calendar. So it's gaining a little ground lately. I think OTK Paladins are picking up steam, so there you go. And if you look at, Holy Light in comparison, it'll probably always be a small graph, but it might be even smaller after Flash of Light's release. But anyway, that's how I found the stats for this particular video, particularly just looking at their play rate across the class. So you can just filter to your heart's content any direction you want and find all kinds of crazy information. It's the best. It's just absolutely the best. So that's it for this look into HSReplaynet. All right, that's pretty cool. And the site's so easy to use, guys. So, again, this is not a paid sponsorship. We're just doing a cross promotion. I talk about HS Replay all the time. I love it. please check it out. You're going to be mind blown if you've never seen it before. And if you're not using it regularly, it's going to make you a better Hearthstone player. Even if you don't care about using it competitively, it's just cool to see the stuff that's on there. Like, it's just fun to go through it, for me at least, as a stats nerd. I think it's absolutely just the greatest thing ever in Hearthstone. So all that said, if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, other cards you've identified that might have fit onto this list nicely, if you disagree with my interpretation or the cards that belong on these sorts of things, leave all that in the comments below. I can't wait to hear it. I love reading it. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.